My name is Hannah. I used to believe in love, the kind that didn't need words or grand acts. I thought if I stayed near, if I gave my time, if I showed up again and again, that one day he would turn and truly see me. I worked at a small city office, the kind where people typed all day and walked fast with papers in hand. He sat 5 desks away from mine. His name was Daniel. He was tall, calm, and always focused. Every morning, he walked in with a cup of coffee. Every morning, I looked up from my desk and smiled. Every morning, he walked past me. He looked at me, yes, but not in the way that mattered, not the way that made you feel real. It was always the same. A passing look, a polite nod, eyes that barely stopped. I told myself it was enough. He knew my name. Once, he even said good job after I finished a report early. That one sentence stayed with me for weeks. I would think about it while brushing my hair, while walking home in the cold, while eating dinner alone. I noticed everything about him. The way he rolled his sleeves just before noon. The way he touched his chin when reading something hard. I knew when he had a bad day by the way he stood at the printer, just staring at the wall. I tried to be near him without being too close. I stayed late when he stayed late. I brought 2 cookies once and offered him one. He said thanks and took it without even looking at me. I smiled and watched him walk back to his desk. Some days, I felt like I was slowly becoming part of the wall. People talked around me, over me, but not to me. I was not loud, not funny, not beautiful like the others. They had long hair, nice clothes, and loud voices. I had quiet eyes and simple shoes. I often watched people laugh, then looked down at my keyboard. I knew I was not part of their world. Still, I stayed. For him. I thought one day he might need help with a file. One day he might sit near me at lunch. One day he might ask about my weekend. But that day never came. He looked at me every day, but never long enough. Never deep enough. There was a woman in the office named Brooke. She had a strong walk and a red phone case. She sat closer to Daniel. They talked often. I watched them from my corner. Once I saw her touch his arm. He smiled at her, a soft smile, the kind I had never seen on his face before. I turned back to my screen, but I could not type. My hands just sat still on the keyboard. Week by week, the space between us felt bigger, even though we were in the same room. I came to work on time. I finished tasks early. I stayed quiet. I wanted to be seen by just one person. That's all I asked. But each day ended the same way, with me walking home alone, my eyes on the sidewalk, my bag heavy with silence. One Friday, something small broke inside me. It was a team lunch. Everyone was going. I was not excited, but I went. I sat 2 seats away from Daniel. The room was full of voices, forks hitting plates, and soft music. People laughed. Someone made a joke. I smiled too, hoping someone would notice. Daniel said something and everyone laughed again. I did not catch the joke. I looked at him. He looked happy. At one point, his eyes moved across the table. For a second, they met mine. I waited, but nothing changed. He looked away. He looked at me the way someone looks at a stranger passing on the street. That moment was so small, but it felt large inside me. That was when I knew. The next week, I started changing little things. I stopped trying to be near him. I stopped checking if he noticed when I arrived. I sat with others at lunch. I walked to the bus stop without looking back. I did not try to stand out. I just tried to feel like myself again. There was an older woman at work named Janet. She sat near the window. She once said to me, "You're always so quiet, but you do good work." That was the first time in a long time someone said something real to me. I smiled and thanked her. It felt like a small light inside me turned back on. One evening, I walked home in the rain. I didn't have an umbrella, but I didn't mind. The air felt clean. I passed the cafe where I once saw Daniel and Brooke. I didn't stop. I just walked past, my steps even, my hands warm in my coat. I started reading again. I used to love stories, but stopped when life got too quiet. Now every night before bed, I opened a book and read 3 pages, sometimes 5. I liked the way the words filled the room. I started going to the park on Sundays. I didn't look for anyone. I just sat, watched the trees, and listened to the wind. By the end of that month, something changed. Not around me, but inside. I no longer waited for Daniel to see me. I saw myself. I saw how much time I spent hoping for small crumbs of attention. I saw how tired I had been. He still looked at me every day. But now, when he passed my desk, I didn't look up. Not to be rude, but because I didn't need it anymore. I am sharing my story, hoping they reach someone. Are you there? Are you listening? Just knowing you're here means everything. After I stopped trying, I noticed things more clearly. Not just about Daniel, but about everything. I saw how often I had been invisible by choice. Not because I wanted to be ignored, but because I was afraid to take up space. I was scared to speak, to ask, to be the one who started the conversation. I thought it was safer to be quiet, but quiet had kept me small. At work, people still talked over me sometimes, but it didn't cut the same way it used to. I began saying small things during meetings, just a sentence or two, enough to hear my own voice. My voice was soft, but it was still mine. Janet noticed. One morning, she stopped by my desk and said, "I liked what you shared in the meeting yesterday." It was a short comment, but I carried it with me all day. It felt like a small door had opened, and behind it, there was a version of me I hadn't seen in years. I started bringing my lunch from home and eating outside. There was a bench behind the building that no one used. I liked the quiet. I watched the birds, the people walking by, the light through the trees. It reminded me that the world was bigger than one man's eyes. Sometimes Daniel still walked by me. Once he stopped to ask about a file. I answered with a calm voice and looked at him for exactly as long as needed. Not longer. I didn't wait for a second question. I didn't wonder what he thought of me. I didn't hope for a smile. I just turned back to my work. At first, this made me feel strong. Then, a few days later, it made me feel sad. Not because I missed the old way, but because I realized how long I had accepted so little. I had trained myself to feel full from empty moments. That sadness didn't last long. Something else took its place. A new kind of peace. I began to feel proud of small things. Finishing a task early, helping a new coworker, choosing a better way to spend my time. These were not big wins, but they were mine. There was one day in early spring when I walked to work without my coat. The sun was soft. The sky was light blue. I passed a bakery, the smell of warm bread filling the air. I didn't go in, but I smiled. I realized I hadn't thought about Daniel all morning. That felt important. At work, people started to notice small things. "You changed your hair," someone said. I hadn't. I just wore it up instead of down. "You seem different," another said. I smiled and said, "Maybe I am." Brooke was still around. She and Daniel still talked, but I no longer watched them. I didn't compare myself to her anymore. She was loud and confident. I was not. And that was okay. One afternoon, I saw Daniel looking around the room. His eyes landed on me. For a second, he paused. Then he walked over. "Do you have the figures for next week?" he asked. I handed him the folder without a word. He said thanks and walked away. Before, I would have thought about that moment for hours. I would have read into it, replayed it, wondered if it meant something. Now, I didn't. It was just work. I began seeing a little more of myself in the mirror. Not just my face, but the way I stood. I used to make myself small. Shoulders down, eyes low. Now I stood straight. My eyes met their reflections. I didn't smile at the mirror, but I didn't look away either. At home, I cleaned out my closet. I threw away old clothes I didn't like. I gave away things that didn't fit. I kept only what felt like me. I also moved some furniture. It was a small apartment, but I made space near the window. I put a chair there and started sitting in it every evening. I didn't scroll on my phone. I just sat and looked outside. One weekend, I joined a book club. It was just 5 women, and we met in the back of a small library. The first time I went, I didn't speak much. The second time, I said a few sentences. By the third time, I shared my thoughts about a chapter. They listened. They nodded. One woman said, "I never thought of it that way." That's a good point. I walked home that day with a soft smile. Not because of the compliment, but because I had said something real, and someone had heard it. I started walking more. Not fast. Not with music in my ears. Just walking. I watched the trees. I listened to birds. I let my feet take me places. Once I walked to a new part of the city. I found a small art show. I walked in, looked around, and talked to the artist. I had never done that before. These things were small, but together they were changing me. At work, I got a message from Janet one day. She asked if I wanted to get tea during the break. We sat by the window and talked, not just about work, but about books, life, small memories. It felt easy. I didn't think about what to say next. I just spoke. A few days later, Daniel passed me in the hall. He looked like he wanted to say something but didn't. I didn't wait. I walked past him with steady steps. I didn't turn back. I didn't need to. For the first time in years, I felt like my life was mine. Not borrowed, not paused, not waiting. Mine. There was a time when I believed that being seen meant being chosen, that someone had to notice me for me to matter. But now, something inside me had changed. It was not loud. It was quiet and slow. But it was real. I no longer waited to be seen. I had started to see myself. Summer arrived with warm mornings and long golden evenings. I began waking up earlier, not because I had to, but because I wanted to. I made simple breakfasts and sat by my window with tea. I liked hearing the city before it became noisy. The birds, the light traffic, the soft breeze. It all felt gentle. It felt like mine. At work, I was still the same person in many ways. I was still quiet, still careful with my words, still not the one to speak first. But something was different in the way I carried myself. I didn't shrink anymore. I didn't sit at the edge of the room. I took my space and filled it without apology. I began helping a new intern named Ellie. She reminded me of myself. She was shy, soft-spoken, and always double-checked everything. One afternoon she asked, "How do you stay so calm during meetings?" I smiled and said, "I didn't used to. But now I try to focus on the work, not what people think." She looked relieved. I could see she needed to hear that. It felt good to be that person for someone else. Daniel and I still work together. He remained polite, quiet, focused. There was nothing unkind about him, but I saw him differently now. He was just a man doing his job, not the center of my world. I didn't look for meaning in his words anymore. I didn't wonder what his smiles meant. His voice no longer reached deep inside me. It stopped at my ears, the way it should have all along. Once, during a short team break, Daniel said, "You've changed. You speak more now. It's good." I looked at him and said, "Thanks." That was all. No long conversation. No smile that lasted. just a simple moment between two coworkers. I didn't carry it with me. I didn't let it grow bigger in my mind. I let it pass like a breeze. I spent my weekends differently too. I used to stay home, tired from the week, feeling low without knowing why. Now, I chose to go outside. I visited the city garden. I sat on benches and watched families, old couples, children. I walked without a plan. I found quiet cafes and small bookstores I never noticed before. I even joined a short weekend course on painting. Not because I was good at it, but because I wanted to try. At first, I was afraid to make mistakes. My hands were slow, my lines shaky. But the teacher smiled and said, "There's no wrong way to paint, only your way." I remembered that sentence. I kept it in my mind. It felt bigger than art. At work, I no longer tried to be near Daniel. In fact, I asked to move desks when a team reshuffle happened. I chose a seat by the window. I liked looking outside during short breaks. Watching the wind move the trees helped me breathe. My mind felt less heavy. One day during lunch, Janet asked if I wanted to join her for a walk. We talked about books, movies, small things. She said, "You seem lighter these days. Happier?" I nodded. "I think I am." She smiled and said, "It's good to see." There was a time when I thought I needed someone to notice me to feel alive. Now I understood something else. I didn't need to be noticed. I needed to feel whole. And wholeness wasn't something someone gave you. It was something you gave yourself. At the end of summer, I took a short trip to a nearby town. It was by the lake. I stayed in a small guest house, walked by the water, and watched the sunrise without taking pictures. I didn't post about it. I didn't tell anyone right away. I just let it be my moment. I bought a small clay cup from a local market. I didn't need it, but I liked the way it felt in my hands. It was simple. Like me. Back at work, things moved forward. Projects, meetings, busy days. Nothing big changed, but inside, I felt new. I felt like I belonged to myself again. On the first day of autumn, I stood in front of the office building and looked at the windows. I used to hope someone was watching me through one of them, but not anymore. Now, I walked in for me. Not for him. Not for anyone else. Daniel passed me in the hallway once. He looked at me, paused for a moment, and opened his mouth as if to say something. But then he didn't. He just smiled and kept walking. And I smiled too. Not because I wanted him to stop, but because I was okay that he didn't. I had learned something important. You can spend years waiting for one person to see you. But the moment you stop waiting, that's when you finally start to see yourself. And sometimes, that's the beginning of everything.